The U.S. will designate Saudi Arabia a major non-U.S. ally. Joining us to discuss is David Wormser, senior analyst at the Center for Security Policy and former senior advisor to Vice President Cheney on the Middle East and strategic affairs. So, David, good afternoon to you. This designation, comes with a number of benefits for Saudi Arabia, like, for example, easier access to U.S. military equipment. I mean, does this signal that Saudi Arabia is now among Washington's closest partners?
Well, yes, it definitely draws Saudi Arabia a lot closer after a decade or more of some tense relationships between the United States and Saudi Arabia. But it actually returns Saudi Arabia to a role it's had for most of the last year, which is to be one of the most important American allies in the region. So this really restores a sort of relationship rather than paves a whole new way.
So President Trump said today that the U.S.-Saudi Arabia partnership is one of the most consequential in the world. And you're saying that this restores the relationship. Why does the Trump administration consider it so critical?
Well, I mean, first of all, just the oil. There's a lot of oil in Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia also holds tremendous influence over several other countries in the region, such as Bahrain and so forth. These countries have major strategic assets, like a naval base in Bahrain. CENTCOM is in Qatar. But we have major assets otherwise in Saudi Arabia. And of course, there's a lot of oil, natural gas in the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and elsewhere. So there's a lot of strategic importance to that. But there's a further strategic importance, which is new, which is this new corridor emerging between India, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Greece. And that is an important trade corridor, but really it's a strategic alliance emerging that creates a southern belt to stop the Chinese Belt and Road, which is pushing in from the north and is anchored more to Qatar, Iran, parts of Afghanistan, Turkey. So it has a major strategic play. It also is a major question over the Palestinians and who really governs the essence of the Palestinian question. And the Israelis trust the Saudis a lot more, Saudis and the UAE, a lot more than they trust Qatar and Turkey. And as a result, the more Saudi Arabia emerges as the voice of the Palestinian question, the more actually the Israelis are comfortable with proceeding forward on that issue.
So, David, you brought up, pardon me. David, you brought up China's Belt and Road initiative. You also brought up Iran. So Russia as well also playing significant roles in the Middle East region, all of which have complicated relationship with the U.S. as well. So my question here is, how aligned are Saudi Arabia's goals with the U.S. interests in this region?
I think they're quite closely aligned. They're not entirely identical, but they're quite closely aligned, more so than sometimes Washington appreciates, because the Saudis always hedge a little bit. They are very cautious by nature. And as a result, sometimes they hedge a little bit with China and otherwise, and that gives the impression that there's light of day. But Saudi Arabia would love nothing more than a robust United States, a very committed United States, and a very confident United States, because it has always thrived the most when that happens. So in many ways, Saudi Arabia's relationship with the United States does reflect a strong parallel of interests. The fact that the Saudis and the Israelis are drawing closer strategically, not necessarily peace yet, but strategically, that it reinforces the American presence in the region without a huge American commitment.
So, David, there's one thing that I have to ask you, because a reporter yesterday during the meeting between Mohammed bin Salman and President Trump asked about 9/11, and the Crown Prince said that the 9/11 plot was used by bin Laden to drive a wedge in U.S.-Saudi relations. Would you just be able to comment on that? How has 9/11 shifted U.S. foreign policy on the Middle East or changed the relationship with Saudi Arabia?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think the Saudi role in 9/11 has never been fully appreciated. I think it was the Saudis had a policy before 9/11 of trying to export some of their internal problems. They funded some of these organizations abroad that led to 9/11, and but as soon as that happened, the Saudis understood it and they cooperated with us in the war on terror. This is already 24 years ago, so they've been a fairly good ally in those issues on Islam, Islamism, the radical jihadis, and so forth. Moreover, their nemesis in the region, Qatar, has gone the other direction. Qatar has become the main funder now of the Muslim Brotherhood and the various terror world that emerges from that. So in many ways, the Saudis, despite the fact that they really were not careful and they were complicit in 9/11, not wittingly, but unwittingly, by having funded some of these organizations that went bad, really bad, they actually are playing the productive role in this, and the Qataris are the ones we should be worrying about now.
Okay, David, just one last thing that I'm wondering today. I'm curious to get your comments on, because President Trump brought up the Board of Peace. How well is that going to work to oversee an interim government in Gaza? Trump says heads of major countries will be on it.
It will work well only when it doesn't work at the beginning. And by that I mean, I think it's fairly clear by now that Hamas has no intention of disarming and that there's no international coalition of forces that will disarm Hamas. And that's a bottleneck. It has to be disarmed. So in the end, the only thing that can really bring about the disarmament of Hamas is Israel finishing the war, which I believe is coming, that they will have to go into the remainder of Gaza and physically dismantle Hamas and comb the area. And then the Board of Peace can come in and help really begin to reestablish and rebuild Gaza. And I think the Saudis and others, that's what the critical issue is. They know nobody will go in as long as Hamas continues to exist. It's just too dangerous, and it will always lead to a loss of investment. So it's really a precondition that we have a problem first, which is that the Israelis will be forced essentially to go in violently to disarm Hamas. And then we really have a Board of Peace and a structure where people will send their troops to keep the peace and begin to develop Gaza.
Well, okay, David, that should do it for today. Really appreciate you always talking to us. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
President Trump says world leaders will sit on a new Board of Peace tasked with guiding an interim government in Gaza. It's part of the second phase of the U.S. brokered ceasefire between Israel and the Hamas terror group. The deal shifts security control to an international stabilization force with a 2-year mandate. The board will oversee security, humanitarian aid, and reconstruction. It will also eventually help transition authority to a reformed Palestinian Authority. Trump, who will chair the board, says major nations want to join, urging Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to take a seat. The UN Security Council approved the U.S. drafted resolution backing the plan, with Russia and China abstaining. Trump called the vote a major step toward stability, saying the board's work in Gaza could grow to wider regions as efforts toward a lasting ceasefire continue. A select committee hosted U.S. leaders in rare earths and magnets today after it released a report on China's dominance and predatory practices in the market. Here's what the chair of the committee